focus of my life and everything that I've done has been centered on having a successful love relationship. I saw my parents when they were growing up, and I hated that my parents' marriage deteriorated. And I want to show what it looks like to be loving and kind and giving and forgiving. And I want to model those virtues as best I can. And being an actor has been spectacular in that way because my life is exploring my mind and changing it. That is a part of my DNA, part of it from difficult aspects of my childhood. You know, I grew up with violence in my home. I developed a really acute emotional sense out of defense. You know, I just needed to make sure that my father was okay. I needed to make sure things were going well. And I just became really hypersensitive to emotional movement in a room as a defense mechanism. And then as I grew and as I started to develop that, you know, that heightened sense that started out as defense, as I settled down and came into a deeper understanding of my power and my desires in the world, it was easier to connect to people in a loving way. It transferred easily from a defense mechanism to an ability to love and care for people. I think there's always an aspect of us that when we feel unloved, in any capacity, in any relationship, when we feel unloved, when we feel mistreated, when we feel somehow disrespected, it's a natural reaction to want revenge. And I think that's what happens with most people, specifically in our most vulnerable stages when we're children, and we haven't done anything to deserve that kind of treatment. It's really hard for the ego to not click into revenge. Once I discovered that mechanism, once I saw that most of us walk around with, that, you know, we want revenge against that mistreatment. It's a little piece of that with all of us. The problem is that when you seek revenge, you destroy yourself. And that's the paradoxical conflict that we all live in. Someone has mistreated us, we want revenge, but if we take it, we hurt ourselves more. You know, so that is the, as Radhanath Swami referred to, the perplexing situation that we find ourselves in. And the only answer is loving kindness. And most of us don't want to hear that. It's like, I'll take my chances with revenge. And for me, I had such a beautiful example of loving kindness in my grandmother when I was growing up. I always knew I wanted to be that. The way that she loved and cared for people. I didn't realize that her giving was connected to her peace. That was something that I got a concept of later, but I always knew that was my example, and I think that's the critical part. We need an example. Somebody has to be an example. Human beings are creatures of example. You got to see it. That's really where I am in my life right now. I want to show what it looks like to be loving and kind and giving and forgiving. And I want to model those virtues as best I can. My father, my mother, and my grandmother, whenever I think about the three of them, I picture a triangle in my mind. And I see, like, my father was the base as discipline. And my mother didn't care about anything but education. Like, that you had to learn, grow, study, travel, Like my mother was really serious about educating the mind. And my grandmother was love and God. My grandmother was that grandmother at Resurrection Baptist Church. And she had, we were doing our Easter recitations and we was at the nativity, So she was that grandmother at the church, and her life was deeply devoted to God and Jesus in the form of loving service, right? So the form that it took was she was working hard to love everybody. I remember my grandmother bringing homeless people into our house when we were little and washing them in our bathtub. I thought that was the nastiest thing. But she would be in the bathroom with her hands washing homeless people. But as I grew older, I just saw how dedicated and devoted she was to living her life in service. There was a day of her life that wasn't devoted to loving and serving. I just watched her. She worked the graveyard shift at the hospital, and she watched us, my brothers and sisters, during the day while my parents were at work, and then when my parents got off work, then she would take a little nap, and then she would go to work at the hospital. She was the happiest person that I had ever met. Nothing fazed her. She was okay. And I remember I was about 12 and I had started rapping. And, so I had my rap book, so I had all my little curse words and everything in my rap book. And she found my rap book, and she never said anything, and she just opened the cover and she wrote a letter to me. Dear Willard, truly intelligent people do not have to use words like this to express themselves. God has given you the gift of words. Be sure to use those words to uplift people. And I was I was reading that and just love Gigi. Yeah. And that was part of the reason why I never used profanity in any of my music. She missionized me in that way to make sure that what I was doing was uplifting others. When you're telling stories, you can always find the part of the story that is a gift for the potential upliftment of somebody that would see it. But yeah, she was all God, all love. The focus of my life and everything that I've done has been centered on having a successful love relationship. I saw my parents when they were growing up, and I hated that my parents' marriage deteriorated. And, as young as I can remember, 5, 6 years old, I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a family. I've never been the guy that wanted to do threesomes and groupies. And I've never been that guy. I always wanted to commit and have a single successful relationship. So the scientist in my mind and in my study of spiritual texts and things like that, I've always been looking for the secret to successful love relationships. And then as I've grown, it's sort of expanded, and I'm seeing the through line. The same basic ideas are successful parenting, and the same basic ideas are being a successful follower or a successful leader or successful student. And I started to see the central issues with all of human relating. And it's the problems, or it's not even problems, the problem is really singular.